Tech speaking to us there, and let's bring in now the Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, who's been standing by for us in Melbourne. Good morning to you, Josh Frydenberg. We'll start off with this announcement from the Prime Minister, $20 million upgrade to community facilities for recreational fishers, campers and boaters. What's the application process going to be like for that?
As I understand it, it will be administered by the states and the territories. Local councils will be able to apply. 1 in 5 Australians engage in recreational fishing, and it's a billion-dollar industry, indeed a multi-billion-dollar industry. So this will be a welcome announcement, again providing support through the states and territories. They'll administer the program, and then local councils will be able to apply.
There has been a history of these sorts of programs being used to gain votes and to improve the coalition's popularity. Will this money just be going towards marginal and coalition-held seats?
As I understand it, this money will be going right around the country, and again it reflects the fact that recreational fishing is something that Australians take to with great gusto. And these type of programs, these type of projects provide great community benefit, and it's only appropriate that federal governments, state governments, local governments are all involved.
In the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, there's a report that the Reserve Bank is a 50-50 chance to deliver a late election interest rate rise to millions of Australian home buyers. If that does happen next month, just before the election, can voters blame the government?
Well, decisions about monetary policy and interest rates are ones for the independent Reserve Bank, but we do know that the Labor Party is promising to spend a lot more money through this campaign, and that would put unnecessary upward pressure on interest rates. We have focused on very targeted spending and indeed emergency spending during COVID. Emergency spending that has now been turned off, and the economic recovery is well underway. We have an unemployment rate at 4%, the equal lowest in 48 years. We have a female unemployment rate which is at its lowest level since 1974, and whether it's youth unemployment, underemployment, or indeed the headline unemployment rate, they're all lower today under the coalition than they were under the Labor Party. So our focus has been on creating a stronger economy. We will see monetary policy normalise over time, as we've seen with fiscal policy normalise over time. But it's the Labor Party that will put unnecessary upward pressure on interest rates because they can't manage money, and they'll always tax more and they'll always spend more.
I want to move to Solomon Islands. When did the government know about this draft security pact between Solomon Islands and China? Was there knowledge of it before it emerged in the media?
Well, we've known that this was always a risk, and that's why we've been
engaged
the
specific draft
at the highest
pact
levels. Well, again, we've known that there were discussions underway. We've known that there was always a risk of such a partnership. But today, the biggest story is of Richard Marles, the alternative Defence Minister in waiting, and the alternative Deputy Prime Minister, according to many. And he has now it's been revealed and reported that he's provided a copy of a speech he gave to the Chinese embassy before he gave it, and a speech in which he said that he would encourage China's engagement in the Pacific, that he dismissed any strategic concerns, that he welcomed more financial assistance from China into the Pacific. So we won't take a lecture from the Labor Party on this very important issue.
I want to stick with the government's involvement in Solomons, though, and Labor has said that this is the worst failure of Australian foreign policy in the Pacific since the end of World War II. The government is framing itself as being strong on national security, that this is one of their strengths. Why wasn't more done in the lead up to this deal? For example, sending the Foreign Minister, Maurice Payne, or even the Prime Minister to go for talks over in Solomon Islands?
Well, the Foreign Minister's been engaging with her counterpart, and the Prime Minister made his first trip after the last election to the Solomon Islands, and so we've been heavily engaged with the Pacific family. We provide more than $160 million a year in financial assistance to the Solomons. It's about 2/3 of their overall assistance is coming from Australia. We're providing a record $1.85 billion of financial assistance into to the Pacific. We've provided patrol boats. We've provided vaccines for COVID to the Solomon Islands, and it continues to be an important partnership. But again, you cited the Labor Party, and I will say in response, we won't take a lecture from the Labor Party when they saw defence spending go down to its lowest level since 1938 at 1.56%. We've increased defence spending to now 2% and growing. I announced on budget night some $10 billion for a new 10-year cyber security plan and program. And that's what we're doing, investing more in defence, building strategic partnerships like AUKUS, and we won't take a lecture from the Labor Party, who were reckless when they were last in office.
The US has warned that this could set a precedent for other Pacific nations. What is the government going to do to prevent this from happening? Tanya Plibersek just before was saying that climate action will be key in the Pacific.
Well, again, we're supporting our friends in the Pacific on mitigation strategies to respond to climate change, and we're providing record developmental assistance.
They have directly asked for more action on climate change from the Australian government, though.
Well, Australia's doing its part. As you know, we've got our 26 to 28% emissions reduction target by 2030 on 2005 levels. We're on track to get to 35%, and we've seen our emissions down by 20% on 2005 levels already, which compares to New Zealand at around 4%, Canada at 1%, the OECD average at 7%. So Australia is doing its part with its technology investment roadmap, and we're committed to net zero emissions by 2050, but we're also providing developmental assistance across the region on the important issue of climate change.
All right, Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your time this morning.
My pleasure.